Hey, and welcome back to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter, which is me. And we are reading through our Bible in 365 days, front cover to back cover, doing it in chronological order. I'm using the 1 year chronological, which the 1 year is essentially a brand name, the 1 year chronological Bible. So if anyone wants to purchase that Bible, it is not through me and any company that I know of. But I think it can be purchased for anywhere between like $14 to $20, or they have an online printable that you can just print out the order and use the Bible that you currently have. And it is at the 1 year chronological Bible online.com. And you can just look up a printable and you can use your own version. So I want to jump right in because there was a lot of things that were happening today in our reading. So today is day 14 of our reading. And so we've been in this for about a half of a month. And so I hope you guys are keeping up. It becomes, I think, easier to understand the more we are in it and the more we understand the people that we are talking about and the people that are sort of in the line of God's promise right now. We're going to start to see a lot of things repeating themselves, which I find extremely interesting. And so I'm wondering what that pattern means. And maybe we'll find a little bit of answers coming up, or maybe it'll just stay open and we won't be too sure until maybe we read it again next time. So, but for today, we are in day 14. The day 14 reading is Genesis 37 through 39, and then First Chronicles 2, 3 through 8. Actually, 3 through 6, and then 8. And so we have a little bit of the genealogy in the middle of there. And so I just want to give sort of a brief overview of both of these stories, because where we've been is we have seen, last thing that we read yesterday was we met Esau's line. And so we saw a lot of the family line through that, where they went, what happened to them. And we really didn't go into any detail of those sons because they're not the sons of the promise. And so, not that they didn't give us any genealogy or historical data, but there just wasn't too much. And so I think there was just this small overview to understand that there really was another line. There was some historical information there that created a people group, which was the prophecy that was given a couple of chapters ago, a couple of days ago. The prophecy was given that there would be a nation. If you remember when Rebecca had the two boys in her belly, it said that there will be two nations. And so we see that there is a nation that is created from Esau, Edom, and that's in Mount Seir, and that there's a whole line that's created over there, and they all are foreign, and they are all unfortunately away from the covenant. And then there's this line of Jacob, twin brothers. Jacob is one line, Esau is another line. And so when we sort of left off with Jacob, it wasn't yesterday, it was a couple of days ago, and Jacob has brought his family back to Bethel, back essentially to portions of the land of Canaan. And so in this reading that we have today, there's a heavy focus on two of the brothers. And so we have Joseph, which is Rachel's son. Rachel's son was the favored wife, or Rachel, excuse me, was the favored wife. She was the wife that he loved. And this was her first son. And so we're going to see a little bit of what happens to him. And then the other son is Judah. Judah is Leah's son, who's technically the first wife, but the unloved wife. And so Rachel was the loved, Leah was the unloved wife. And so this is the fourth son. Judah is the son that essentially, where she says, she's joyful that she's had this fourth son. The other sons kind of get names of misery, or maybe he will love me. And Judah is really the son that gets the first sort of cheerful name out of the four. So it seems that she's maybe come to terms with her situation when she had Judah. So I'm going to give a quick account, maybe not so quick, but a quick account of Joseph. And then I will also give an account of Judah. And I just want to see maybe some comparisons and contrasting between the two of them. So when we start in Genesis 37, Jacob is in the land of Canaan. And this is sort of his family, which is, it says in verse 2. So we start out with Joseph, who is 17 years old. And Joseph is a dreamer. He has dreams, and they're meaningful dreams. And we find out pretty quickly that these dreams have meaning, and the meaning of them is really intense. And so it's not just, there's a lot of intensity and a lot of strength in his dreams. So uh, his first dream is, first of all, he's already got a little bit of heat with his brothers. He has gone to his father about some of his brothers, that they sort of weren't doing some of the things that they should have been doing, and so he's told on them to his brothers. And then he's also the favored son because he comes from the favored wife, and he's been given this coat that's a if you ever heard of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, it's this multicolored coat, which back then was more money, and it took more money and more time to create a coat of this value. And so we can see that Jacob really favored Joseph in a lot of ways, especially considering at this point that he is the youngest brother, and there are 10 other older brothers at this point, and Joseph is the one that gets a lot of special treatment. So it creates animosity in families, and I think that's understandable under any circumstances. But anyway, so what we've seen is that Joseph has had two dreams, and the first dream is where he's out tending a field and they're growing sheaves, and his is super tall, and there are 11 others, and those all bow down to the super tall sheaf. And so the brothers get mad. We're not going to bow down to you. And then there's another part where he has another dream where the sun and the moon and the stars all bow down to his star. And so then the parents get upset, and they're like, we're not going to bow down to you. What are you trying to say? And so the brothers get very frustrated. The father just really kind of contemplates it, and he's wondering what he means by it, but he definitely does get a little bit upset. And so at this point, they're frustrated with Joseph. They've had it, and they're off tending their flocks. And Jacob, the father, tells Joseph, hey, your brothers are out here. Go out there, see what they're all doing, and then come back and let me know. Which, by the way, is probably not the best way to unify the relationship amongst the brothers, by asking one to sort of sell out the rest. Anyway, but Joseph goes out there, and there's this one spot, and he isn't. The brothers aren't there where essentially they're supposed to be. The brothers aren't there, and so we see a man, and he asks this man where the brothers are, and the man leads them towards their brothers. And I just want to note on this man image that not that long ago Jacob wrestled a man. Jacob sort of confirmed that that man was God. We don't have any of that in this area, but the way that it is written, I just wonder if there's this possibility that this man was sending him off to where his brothers are. So if there was a point and a purpose, that maybe he wouldn't have found them here, but this man guides him on the way. And as always, I always love to say to you guys, I want you to read it. This is just my opinion based on the reading, that these are the things that I see. So make sure that you are doing your reading as well. And you might agree and you might not agree. You might think that this has nothing to do with anything. But this man sends them off. As Joseph is going on his way, the brothers see him, and they get together and they try and talk about how they're going to kill him. And so they discuss how they're going to kill their brother. And then the one brother says, hey, let's just throw him in a cistern instead, because the other brother, it was Reuben, the other brother had this plan of going back to get him. And the cistern is sort of a it's not a well. It's this big, it's dug underground, probably to stay cool. It's this big underground water tank, essentially. And so it's no deeper than 40 feet. And I'm not saying that thinking that 40 feet is shallow. It's not, but it is no deeper than 40 feet. So they are able to get him in, and they are able to get him back out again. But he is not able to do that on his own. And so they throw him in an empty one. And Reuben is hoping that that he can come back and save him later and protect him and bring him home. However, Reuben leaves, and the other brothers then get this crazy idea that instead of leaving him in the cistern, or instead of killing him, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. So the Ishmaelites, which again, Ishmael was not a son of the promise. He was Isaac's older brother, born by Abraham and his concubine Hagar. We see that his family line is coming down, and they are buying goods for selling. And so they say, let's sell him, and then we will tell our dad that he's dead. And so the Ishmaelites bought him, and they wound up selling him to Potiphar, which I'll come to that in a minute. But in the meantime, the brothers went back and they told their father, and their father was devastated. Their father essentially said, "I will never stop mourning until I see my son again." He was very brokenhearted by what he thought was the death of his youngest and most favored son at the time. And I say he's the youngest and most favored because at this time Rebecca was still alive, because they mention his mom, and therefore she couldn't have died in childbirth yet. So she was still alive, and it looks like the younger brother was not born yet. So they're obviously, the father is devastated with his favorite son, and then the Ishmaelites sell him to an Egyptian captain of the guard. And so this guy is, again, he is not a believer in the God of Jacob and the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, excuse me, Jacob, Isaac, Abraham. But he does recognize that Joseph is blessed by the Lord. And so he mentions that Joseph is blessed by the Lord on more than one occasion. And so his recognition is that he wants to then make him head of the household because he's been blessed by the Lord. And then he makes him head over all of his household, and he's got all of this power. And then the wife comes in and says, Joseph, I want you to sleep with me. And Joseph says, no. He says, I have, your husband has put me in charge of everything. I have power over everything. And I'm going to make a guess at this point. He's anywhere between, because he starts out at 17. So he's anywhere between 20 to 25. He's probably relatively still young, yet he is overflowing with Lord's blessings, and the house is prospering because of him. And he says to the woman, to Potiphar's wife, that he will not do this, act, because he does not want to sin against God. And so he is reminding the audience, which is the wife, that he has faith in the true God, he has faith in God, and that he doesn't want to sin against God, and that sleeping with her, ruining the trust of his boss, would be doing that. And so he's sort of drawing a line in the sand, and she bothers him every day, day after day after day after day. She comes to him, and he continues to tell her no, until finally she's alone with him, and she says the same thing to him. And then she grabs his coat. He runs off without his coat. And then she winds up taking the coat to her husband and tells her husband that he has tried to have sex with her. So she sort of manipulates the entire story, turns everything on its head, blames him 100%. And instead of this guy saying, Joseph has done everything I have asked of him, instead of looking at the character that he's seen in Joseph, he sends Joseph to jail. And so I see a man that is blessed by the Lord. I see a man that has been recognized as being blessed by the Lord. So it's not that Potiphar doesn't recognize he's been blessed by the Lord. He openly admits that he has. And yet still, he trusts somebody else over top of Joseph, and then throws Joseph in jail. And then when Joseph is in jail, once again, it says, if we go down to Genesis 39, verse 21, it says, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. So once again, we see that Joseph has been blessed in prison. I know that probably sounds contradictory, but he's been blessed in prison by the Lord because of him loving the Lord and him honoring the Lord. So the Lord is always with him. And therefore it says that the warden he paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. This is Joseph. Joseph is blessed by God. Joseph is wildly successful in anything he does. And Joseph continues to be punished by man. So I say this because a believer in God doesn't have a perfect life. And I want to look at Joseph, and I want to say Joseph did everything right. And it looks really positive. It says, Joseph was everything. Everyone found favor with him. Everyone loved him. He was blessed wherever he went. But there's still a recognition that his brothers dumped him in a cistern, left him for dead. His brothers had him sold into slavery willingly, knowing that he was going to get sold into slavery. This was their brother, and they did this to him. And then when he got to this house, he wasn't trusted enough, even though he brought blessings to this house. He wasn't trusted enough to stay out of jail. So he was first a brother, a youngest brother, and then he became a slave, and then he became a prisoner. And so, yes, the Lord blessed him. How can we say that he was blessed even in those circumstances? He still honored God even in those circumstances. And so I want to be clear that there is not always, I don't want to say there's not always a silver lining, because it does say that he is blessed, right? It does say that he found favor among these people he was around, but he's still living in hardship. His life is still not perfect. And I want to bring this up because one of the things that I have noticed, and I'm going to bring it up when we talk about Judah, is that these people that we have seen over and over again in Sarah, in Rachel, in Leah, and then eventually we're going to see in Judah, they have taken the power away from God and they've taken it unto themselves. And Joseph never does that. Joseph always leaves the power with God, and he's consistently blessed because of what he's doing. He doesn't say to himself, I can't believe my brothers did this, and therefore I'm going to run away from this slave's house, and I'm going to, or run away from my master's house, and I'm going to go back to my house. He doesn't get put in prison and say, I'm going to break out of prison because I don't deserve to be here. We consistently just see him being honoring, being so honoring that everybody around him wants to be near him. I think it's a great lesson to be learned for me, that when I am in circumstances that are not not of my own choosing. So when I'm in circumstances that I find so difficult that I don't think that I should be there, uh, I want to be able to allow God to use those circumstances for his good. And so I say that because it's easy to say, and it is much, much, much harder to work through when I'm in that situation. What I want to do is I want to find scripture that fits into the situation for me doing whatever it is that I really want to do, right? We have so much scripture. We have so many verses, and so many verses that are used in a really bad way. And yet it looks as though God blesses those who honor God exactly where they are. And so it's sort of a call out to all of us who say that we believe. Are we going to honor God? Are we going to pray? Are we going to worship no matter what circumstance we're in? Or are we going to try and be our own boss, and we're going to try and get out of that situation? And so I just want to go right into Judah, because I'm hoping maybe that I can show what I mean by that. So if we go to Judah, Judah again is the fourth son of Leah, right? So he is significantly older than Joseph, and he moves away and he gets married. And so he's obviously living with a family. He moves away and he gets married, and he marries a foreigner. So he doesn't marry one of his people or one of his family members. And I say family by cousins and nieces or nephews or great this and that and the other, which we've seen in the past, right? We've seen that Abraham did that, and we saw that Isaac did that, and we saw that Jacob did that. They were all sent back into an area to marry somebody of essentially their family. And again, I hate using that word because I certainly don't mean it like a brother or sister. And I know we have so many people that that's not necessarily true for us, but that was true for them. They wanted to keep it amongst their people. They wanted to keep it amongst people who believed in the same God and amongst the people who lived in that same area. And so they were creating a people group. And so what we see is that they choose wives in that people group. Judah does not do that. Judah chooses a Canaanite wife, and it looks as if he loved her, and he had 3 children by her, 3 boys. The first son was wicked, and so we see that God immediately kills that first son. The first son married a woman named Tamar. She is also a foreigner. He marries somebody in that land of Canaan. And so he marries Tamar. Wicked, and he dies. So in that custom, what they would do is they would have her marry the second son, but her first child would be the descendant of the first son because she was unable to conceive with the first son. So financially, essentially, the first son would get the blessings of the oldest, the first person that she married. So the first son that was born from the second guy, hoping that all makes sense. Onan, who was the second son, didn't want that to happen. So here we go again. Onan took it in his own hands, and he decided, instead of doing what his father wished for him, which his father was Judah, his father wished for him to marry Tamar, to have a child in the first son's name, as customary that they would do. But that Onan said, I didn't want to do that. And so instead, every time he was with Tamar, he spilled his seed. And the Lord saw that as wicked. And so the Lord took him out as well. And so at this point now, Judah is worried. Judah is their father, and he is worried. They took out two sons. He's only got one son left. This son is a little bit younger. And so what he does is he tells Tamar that she has to go back to her home, so live back in her home. And we were going to wait until that youngest son grew up a little bit in order for him to marry her. But it says in there very specifically, it was because Jacob was afraid. And so it wasn't out of the kindness of his heart or out of letting him grow, but it was because he was afraid, because his two other sons had already died. So here we are now. Judah is not living in the Lord. He is living in fear. He is afraid of what's going to happen. And instead of maybe discussing the wickedness of those boys, what he does instead is he hides that third son and he lets Tamar suffer. So historically, what we have known about women back then is that without a son, she was essentially without anything. And Judah's family didn't even keep her in their house to support her. So she had to go back home to her parents' house and be supported by them. And there was also a chance that she was consistently in mourning. She was always wearing black because she was a woman that was widowed twice. And so she was not living the best of lives at this point. So Judah sort of has left her to suffer because he was afraid of doing what was customary in his family and marrying the youngest to her. So, right, already now we're living in some fear. So Tamar had noticed that, Judah's wife then passed away. And then Tamar had noticed that this younger son had grown up, and Judah was not giving the younger son to Tamar. And so she was left in a position where she was destitute. She was probably destitute, living in her parents' house, no son of her own, no future. And so she took things into her own hands. I want to be very clear. I am not excusing what she did. I do not believe that she did the right thing. However, what I see is that she did do the wrong thing. God still gave her a blessing, even though she did the wrong thing. Now, I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's because it was maybe a punishment to Judah, because Judah was the son of the promise. See, Tamar was not the daughter of the promise. She was a foreigner. She was not a someone of God. Judah was. So Judah was part of the 12. He was part of the covenant. He was part of what was promised by God. She wasn't. So I also want to be clear on the distinct differences. She didn't necessarily have a fear of God because she wasn't following God. He was. And so there was a greater responsibility on him to do the loving and honorable thing according to the love of God, not as much her. So I want to make it clear that there are distinct differences. So then she gets dressed up, puts a veil on her face, finds out where he's going to be. He assumes that she's a prostitute, asks to sleep with her. She says, "What will you pay me?" He says, "A goat." He doesn't have a goat. She says, "How will I know?" He gives her his seal and his staff. So he gives her essentially everything that is him. And so you would know that this is from him and he did this deed. She winds up getting pregnant. She goes away, never to be seen again. He tries to find her to pay her the goat. And everyone in town is like, "There was no prostitute here. I'm not sure what you're talking about." And so he goes back. He hasn't paid her the goat, but she still has his seal and his staff. And so They find out that she's pregnant, and immediately Judah wants to stone her to death. So here we go again. He has not done the right thing by her, and now he wants to stone her to death. He doesn't look for the man who has made her pregnant. He only chooses to stone her. I always hate to say this is about behavior, because I want to be very careful that this isn't a, if you do this, then this will happen. And that's not true. But he was not honoring God in his treatment of her. He was not showing love to her the way that God consistently showed love to him. And that's, again, one of these sort of lessons that we want to understand, is that we need to love first and more. So that needs to be something that we are called to do as believers of the one true God, and obviously for us as believers of Christ. And so he said to burn her. She came out and she said, the Father is the one who has the staff and the seal. And she said, do you know who this could be? And of course, it's Judah, because it was divine. She's there one time, and, she's with him one time, and he happens to get her pregnant. So this is, I believe, a divine birth. And so we see that she gets pregnant by Judah. He is mortified. And not only that, he really calls out that he was the shameful one and that she was not. And so he does his best, I believe, to clean her in a very loving way, to clean her and recognize that she has done the right thing and he has done the wrong thing. And so then he honors her, and then they wind up having a set of twins. And then he never sleeps with her again. And so this is where, well, we leave off with Joseph going to prison, but this is essentially where we leave off with the two of them. And again, I just want to state that our emotions take up a lot of space that we should be giving to the Lord. There's this song that I listen to by Phil Wickham, and it's, when I fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. And so it's in essence this posture of humility, and with my hands lifted high, I am in full prayer to the Lord, asking him to help me, and not doing the work myself. So I'm not depending on my own strength. I'm not depending on my own emotions. I'm not depending on what I think is best, but I'm on my knees and I'm praying to God and I'm asking him what to do. And I want to walk away for myself with that, the lesson that more often than not, I find myself up in a stance with my fists up instead of on my knees with my hands, palms exposed, and just leaving myself open to the Lord. And so it's obviously a call for myself to gain more of this posture. And again, it is not because it's the right thing to do, but it is so honoring of the Lord and what he asks of us. He asks us to trust him. He asks us to love him. He asks us to worship him because he is so good and so worthy. That's all for today. I know I went a little bit long today, but I thought it was a really good and for me, a pretty exciting chapter. And so tomorrow we are going to be working on day 15, which is going into Genesis 40. And so I think we're going to see a little bit more of Joseph and what happens to his family. And so until then, if you would like and subscribe and share this with people, if you have enjoyed it, if it has been a blessing, if you have learned anything, if you have heard anything that maybe has been any kind of blessing to you. And I am so thankful and grateful that you guys are watching and reading along with me. And let's get back to it tomorrow.